The sound isn't playing. You have to click the audio box.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's on, because it says that it's not on mute.
You have to click the audio box. Let's just go ahead and go to the panel. Okay, Carter, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. So now I can see you all. So that's good. There's a little bit of a delay, but I can see you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I know they introduced you, but I'm going to give just a quick introduction of our panelists, who are all editors of this new series by the University Press of Kentucky, Appalachian Futures, Black, Native, and Queer Voices. Krista Wilkinson is the author of Perfect Black, The Birds of Opulence, Blackberries, and Water Street. She was named a 2020 USA Fellow by United States Artists and teaches at the University of Kentucky, where she is an associate professor of English in the MFA Creative Writing program. Annette Sanook Clapsaddle is an enrolled member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and is the author of Even As We Breathe. Her work has appeared in Yes Magazine, Lit Hub, Smoky Mountain, Living Magazine, South Writ Large, and The Atlantic. Annette teaches at Swain County High School and serves on the Board of Trustees for North Carolina Writers Network. And Davis Shoulders is director and worker owner of Atlas Books, an independent and cooperatively owned bookstore in Johnson City, Tennessee, which is forthcoming this summer. And they have served as the events organizer for Union Ave Books in Knoxville, Tennessee since 2018. So welcome everybody. I'm excited to see your faces and to be here with you, although virtually. I thought we could just start off if you could just tell us a little bit more about, specifically about the series, what it's about, what your aims are. And then I was going to have each of you talk a little bit about why you signed on to be an editor and what the project means to you personally.
I think we're all trying to figure out who's going to go first. Well, you know, I'll start us off, and I'm sure my colleagues will fill in. I came to the project through my relationship with the University Press of Kentucky when my novel came out, and the idea was based around a conversation that there are a lot more voices that we haven't heard from in our region, and I know, you know, from my perspective, I'm often asked, what are some great titles for Native American literature? And I found myself having to leave place, having to think west, having to think of other tribes, but not just other tribes, completely other regions. And it's been something that that I've hated to have to answer that question, that I can't give titles, that I can't give resources. And so when the folks with the University Press of Kentucky approached me, I was thrilled to start thinking about what are the options, how do we identify these voices, and how do we work with other groups from our area to identify those voices. I'll let someone else maybe speak more to the inception of the idea, because I don't think I was there for the first conversation. So
yeah, Davis, do you want to talk about the idea overall, because I think you were in at the very beginning?
Sure, I'll jump on. And yeah, so I have been a bookseller for almost 5 years now. I started at Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C., and then ended up coming back home to Knoxville to kind of take on bookselling here. And in the course of doing that, I've gotten to know sort of the distinction between sort of the Appalachian Lit community and maybe the broader sort of independent bookstore network community, and kept seeing opportunities for these events to grow and have such a wide attendance in Knoxville specifically, but watching the tours in different places around, and just wanting to uplift and feature those voices. And so in the process of thinking about that, and when the pandemic hit, I started talking to everyone I knew about this bookstore idea in Johnson City, and have been on that for over a year now, and it's finally about to come through. But one of the people I spoke to about that idea was Abby Freeland, who was considering this position with the University Press of Kentucky. And I was talking about the store, and we were talking about Annette's book actually, and hosting an event for her. And we just started sharing ideas about what we thought was missing, in the same vein that Annette was talking about, and what would a longer publishing series be that would resolve some of these gaps that we've been seeing. And I was like, well, I'm going to have a bookstore that's going to be focused on Appalachian literature. That's what I want it to be about. I would love to have a hand in making sure that those are books that I want to sell. And so that was some of the early conversations that Abby and I had were about, so, who would need to be represented, what type of voices. And so a lot of that focused more on nonfiction, people who haven't been published before, or voices, maybe not necessarily writers, activists, organizers from the region, people with a bit more radical politics, in response to the reckoning that Carter will talk about later. And so I was like, sign me up as soon as possible. And so we started thinking about, who would be great collaborators on this, and how would a series editor position look, and who would share that. And so pass it on to Crystal there.
Well, for me, it was sort of when I was asked, it was sort of a natural extension of the sort of literary activism work that I've been doing for years personally, and work that I've been doing through the Appalachian Poets, the idea of amplifying, in my perspective, Black voices in Appalachia, because there's still this notion, except within ourselves, that we sort of don't exist. When people think about Appalachia, they don't automatically think about African American writers. So I was excited and jumped at the opportunity, and I think this is one of the most forward-thinking things that's happening. And there's so much happening with publishing across the country, but I think that it excites me even more that right here in the region that we're doing something that's as forward-thinking, if not even more forward-thinking, than some of the things that they're doing in New York and some of the other places. So I think it's very, very exciting. I'm very excited about it. I'm glad to be a part of it.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about it too, and it just feels so important and kind of urgent to have this series now. And we'll talk about this more, but of course, I think most people think of Appalachia and they think white and straight, and that's it. I know this is, a brand new series, but you already have a fantastic list, a growing list of forthcoming books. Do you want to tell us about any of those titles at this point, or do you want to talk a little bit more about just what kind of work you're looking for?
I'd be happy to talk about some of the titles. I think, I don't know if y'all want to jump in, but I know I've spoken with all the authors that we have lined up, or editors that we have, so I can do a brief overview and then you can fill in. But one of the first people we signed is Dr. Nkechi Elamine of the Black in Appalachia podcast, and she's based in Knoxville, and so I've been working with her some. She also has a bookstore project, the Bookshop at the Bottom, that they are working on. They have a big fundraiser campaign, but we were really excited to approach her because of what she's already doing through the podcast and expanding diverse voices and narratives and just taking on pop culture in the region. But she has a dissertation that was ready to go about Chocolate City and Knoxville being a chocolate city. And so there's a lot of place justice conversation in that. That's really important. And this sort of dividing line between the South and Appalachia. We also went to another great podcast that has some regional impact, Country Queers podcast, and Ray Geringer. And they featured a lot of country queers from across the country. But when we approached them about the idea of sort of grounding in Appalachia and trying to bring some of those voices to fruition, they were really excited because they said they initially had thought of it as a book project, and then the interviews had just come along, and so now we're really returning to the roots and a lot of the conversations that had taken place out of Highlander Center and interviews, and so they've got a great list of contributors that they're looking to explore queerness and place and some of their own history in West Virginia. So that's going to be really great. And then the third major project beside our own, which I'll let us all speak to, but Stacey Jane Grover has a memoir and essays, Tar Heel of Trans, about growing up in Ohio and all sorts of opinions and reckoning with their queerness and what it means to be trans here. Just really powerful writing. There's a recent Belt publication that Stacey wrote about Lancaster, so I highly recommend reading that. But yeah, those are the three that we've already brought on, so you can kind of see what they look like. And then, like I said, I'll let Crystal and Annette talk about the specific anthologies they want.
Yeah, so I'm working on editing the Blacks in Appalachia anthology, and I think I want it to be all encompassing. I'm still working on the vision for it, but I imagine talking about the themes of food, of place, lots of categories, and lots of different kind of writers. I could very easily do an Appalachian poet anthology, but I want so many more voices that we haven't heard from, voices that are writing accessible pieces that may be academics, but they can also write personal essays about their own experiences in Appalachia. And I envision including poetry, fiction, and essays as far as genre is concerned. And I'm really excited and ready to get started on it and to try to include as many voices, emerging writers, experienced writers, people who may not even consider themselves writers, but have a story, important story to tell about Appalachia. So I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah, so I'm working on a similar project in terms of an anthology that is kind of vast in scope in terms of genre and whatnot, but for Native voices in Appalachia. It is a bit of an interesting question to determine what voices are Native in Appalachia and how do we kind of wade through those different political and community lines and historical lines. So that was actually the most exciting part for me, is I have to start with some difficult questions about where these voices are coming from, and making sure that that they're authentic Native voices, and that may look different than one might think. So if we look at the region of Appalachia and the land bases for historical tribes in this region, it's somewhat limited to federally recognized tribes that exist today. But I don't envision this anthology being limited to that, because Native people, just like all people, ebb and flow within communities. And I think it's more a sense of belonging to that specific culture that is part and parcel of Appalachia, but also, and we'll talk about that this whole series is about Appalachian futures, and not, what is it, what has it been, what is it now, but also what is it becoming. And so I'm excited to kind of to dive in and see how Native voices are part of the future of Appalachia. So like Crystal mentioned, I'll be looking across genres. I'm still formulating also in my mind how this is it's all going to play out. But one thing in particular that I'm really interested in are youth voices. And I'm a high school English teacher, and I'm really thinking about how to involve some younger voices in the project.
And I'll finish real quick. My collection is going to look at religion and sort of queer identity and relationship to religion. I came from a church background, and so have a lot of things to unpack there. But I love hearing about the way that we as Appalachians interact with religion, whether that's from a distance or from a close proximity, or from escaping or clarifying. And so we're going to just sort of do just a general take on what does it mean to be queer and have some religious or a belief or faith-based system in your history. So that will be pretty wide open too in terms of form, but definitely imagine more essays, more personal essays about how it's affected your identity and formation. So
it's all sound really amazing, and I'm looking forward to all of them. And I think, something maybe that Annette was speaking to a little bit, that leads into this other question I had, which was about defining Appalachia. And I think that, so often in Appalachian scholarship, there's this this need to kind of explain and define Appalachia and focus on like the problems of Appalachia, or only on the past. So I was interested in this idea of the future. And in the description, it says that the series does not seek to define the region, which I think is really interesting and even kind of revelatory approach in Appalachian studies. So could you talk a little bit more about that, like what it means to publish books about Appalachia but not define Appalachia in a particular way?
Well, I think I'm very excited about the idea of not defining, because I think that has been sort of a fighting ground for years, in scholarship, in literature around the region, in hiring people. Like I've seen it on all kinds of levels in various positions that I've been in, various positions that I've worked in. So I find that exciting that people will be coming to it. And of course, those of us that are editors will have to sort of decide what kind of shape, so that'll force us to think about it too. Think about resisting defining and resisting putting people in boxes. But so many people are, especially young people, I think, are of the region. either they moved to the region or their people have always lived in the region, but they're starting to define for themselves and perhaps redefine what the region is. And so I think it's very exciting to have those voices and to sort of throw out a broad net and see what we catch without those barriers being on it. You know, and wonder who will respond to a call for submissions that has those words in it. You know, I would think that someone who doesn't in some ways define themselves, whatever it means to them as Appalachian, and in my case, Black, wouldn't send in a submission. So I think it's going to be interesting and it'll be an interesting process, I think, for me as writer and editor to go through those and come with my own 50-year-old biases about what the region is and sort of fight and suppress those too, because, you know, if we're truth telling, we all come to the table with some of these things that are very long standing. So I'm looking forward to the process and sort of creating sort of a narrative arc from, like you said, the past maybe to the present and then to the future. That's what I sort of see as a narrative arc through the anthology that I'll be working on. So I find that I keep using the word forward thinking, but I think the press is forward thinking, which makes all of us that are working on it also think forward in different ways and move and shape things in different ways. So I think it's, I keep doing this, but I think it sort of shakes some things up, both within ourselves, in the literature, in the scholarship of the region. So it's, I keep using the word exciting too, but I think it's very exciting about what this will bring and how this will shape future scholarship.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that and add that one of the things is most exciting about the series to me is that we all are involved and can have those conversations about how we're looking at literature and what questions we're asking about submissions. And I can learn so much from the other editors on the project, because on the series, because they are asking questions I might not have thought of to ask of Native literature, for example, or, you know, or if we're just working together as a whole, looking at certain manuscripts. So I'm really excited about that collaborative process. And then also with, you know, our advisory board, we have some fantastic mentors really on that list as well. So I think it opens up a dialogue to ask more questions than we normally would ask in a typical publishing process.
Yeah, I would say too that whole model, right? The whole model that we're using of being a community and looking at this is a very, certainly not a patriarchal model. It's a model more stemmed in, I'm going to use a gender, but it's more of a feminine concept, I think, to have this sort of communal nature of looking at work. So just everything about it is different. I'm sure that maybe, Davis, when you all were initially talking about it, that there's some model somewhere, maybe, or maybe this is a brand new thing and other people will use this concept as a future model. But I love that this doesn't seem to be hierarchical and it's communal.
Yeah, I think that as someone working on a cooperative business, right, model, there's a lot that you don't know, and there's a lot that you're learning in the process, and that's how you define yourself, is not by the limitations, but by sort of like your expansion and your growth. And so, I mean, one thing I would say back to sort of the original question is, you know, a lot of people do not define themselves as Appalachian until later, or realize, you know, that it kind of comes back to you as you understand your history. Same thing with queer identity. It's never defined. I don't know. For me, it's this evolving thing, and so we're trying to like appreciate sort of that amorphous, forward-thinking movement and what's happening, you know, with society as a whole. While also trying to acknowledge geography and place. I think one of the biggest problems is that Appalachia is viewed by those outside of Appalachia as a very limited definition, and comes from such a lack of awareness of its geography, and yet sort of fetishizes its geography as being the thing that it's about. And so I think that sometimes Appalachian writers specifically are afraid to identify as from Appalachia and might put a different city or location on their bio because of how they want to be presented in the market. But what if you were just a writer writing what you write from this region? Is that not enough to make you Appalachian? And is there not of a community hold here? And I think that this series makes a home for those writers who would otherwise feel like they were just being put up against other straight white men in the industry. And instead, this is solely devoted to not those people. I just had a conversation with Robert Geip, and we talked about what it meant to be, a good white man in this, and saying that, like, well, you're doing good work, Robert, but this notion of it is time. It's time for other voices that are everywhere here in this region, and just because we haven't seen them in print yet doesn't mean we don't need to. So.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it sounds like it is built on such like sort of a community kind of style structure, which I think is really exciting and really different from the way publishing typically works, right? So yeah, everything you're saying is like, I have a lot of follow-up, but I thought maybe we could talk a little bit more. You sort of spoke to this about kind of the responsibility and role of publishing, or what publishing can do. And so, this past summer, we saw massive uprisings and protests across the country, across the world, after the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And there seemed to be this sort of collective moment of reckoning across all these different spheres, like nonprofits, corporations, political institutions, and specifically in the book world. And in publishing, there was on Twitter, there was the hashtag publishing paid me, where writers were talking about the pay disparities between for Black writers and people of color. There were like a few shakeups in newspapers and magazines with white editors kind of stepping down. But it's still it's an overwhelmingly white industry. And I think if any real and significant lasting change in publishing is going to happen, like we're still sort of going through that now, and it remains to be seen, But I was curious, like, Crystal and Annette, as writers, if, as Black and Native women who are writing about Black and Native and Appalachian lives, I'm just curious what challenges you have faced while navigating the publishing industry.
Well, I think not to just be talking about how old I am, but I think things have changed. Like at the beginning, like Blackberries was published in 2000. And so I think in these 21 years, things have certainly changed. But I think then at the beginning of it, Blackberries had a hard time. That book was hard to sell because people saw, outside of the greats, outside of like Alice Walker and Ernest Gaines and some people like that who were, Toni Morrison, who were publishing, those of us who were trying to get published at that time, what they really seemed to want, what New York seemed to want, or larger publishers seemed to want, was an urban experience, a contemporary urban experience. And I still have those letters in a box from all of the big publishing houses who loved that book. I still have all my love letters, and I pull them out every so often and read them, that they loved the book. They loved the voice. but they wanted me to write something. They said when I remember one line particularly that said, when she wants to write something more contemporary, can you send us that? We'd love to see it. As though rural Black lives in the book is contemporary. It's not set in the past. It's just Black people living in a rural space. So that was that's probably my hardest publishing story. There are lots of others. Lots of interesting editing stories too, because when it first got published with Toby Press at the time had an office in London, England. My first editor was from Switzerland. And so all of the Kentucky colloquialisms they had no idea what was going on. So that was a big issue too when it did get published. But I'll let Annette jump in.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear you say some things that feel similar. You know, I think when I write about a Native community, I'm always wrestling with how much of a history lesson I have to give in a fiction narrative, because conversations with publishers in the past or agents in the past have largely been about misunderstanding of who we are as Cherokee people. I mean, there's lots of stereotypes about who Native people are, and very specifically who Cherokee people are. And a lot of the Indigenous writers who have had success in the traditional publishing world they're from other tribes, and so the complexity of Native peoples is something that is difficult to have a conversation with, an editor or publisher in New York. That a Cherokee community, and as you mentioned, in a rural part of the world, is very different than a story about an urban Indian experience in Chicago being experienced by a member of the Lakota tribe or something like that. So I've had the biggest difficulty is just that I think oftentimes Native peoples are seen as a monolithic culture, and so having to explain, no, Eastern Band Cherokee are still Native people, even though we live in the mountains, is sometimes a more difficult sell than one might imagine. So the rural versus the urban comes into play as well, especially now. I think there's a lot of Native writers writing from the urban perspective, and and they're doing quite well. And so we're seeing that a little bit in Native literature too, I think, right now. But I'll agree that, I mean, just this year, the number of Native writers who published with major presses even was phenomenal compared to previous years. We've seen a lot of change this year, and I do hope it continues.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear both of you talk of like, just how place is so wrapped up in people's kind of misconceptions and stereotypes about then other identities. I mean, it comes up for queer culture as well, where people assume if you're writing about queer lives and you're writing about urban queer lives, and that queer people don't exist in rural areas. But you're right. I mean, I think we are seeing a lot of really significant change, and more diverse stories and voices being, telling their own truths and being lifted up. Davis, do you want to say anything just about your kind of experiences as a bookseller and observations or experiences of the publishing world and Appalachian literature? Yeah,
I mean, I think we've mentioned New York, but in starting my career at Politics and Prose in DC, that was something that was just sort of communicated to me as a bookseller and to even the DC writing community, that it was parochial to New York, that New York is where the stories get told, and that's where people buy the stories. And and so to think, like when you're going, to the South, that's another dimension away. And then you go to Appalachia, and that's an even another dimension. So the sense of the market is so narrow. And when you're talking about major presses, right? And this is like what me as a bookseller, I get sold to by the sales rep, right? Like as much as we are in the region, and Knoxville is maybe not as central as other places, the way that we get sold Appalachian titles is very strange. There are times where there are books that I would expect to be really promoted to us that are very Appalachian, we never see on lists. And then there are ones that are like, marketed by a major press, slightly outside or maybe not necessarily direct experiential, is sold as an Appalachian title. And so it's just, without being discouraging, there's not a clear, like it seems like there are presses that will take on one Appalachian book a year or something like that, if you're talking about these. And so I know how many writers there are in this region. They come into the store all the time. And so I think it's just this publishing, book selling supply chain, right? It would just, when New York sees the sales numbers of where books are bought and what books are bought, they must just not be seeing what they want to see here. And that's why they wouldn't sell, because if there aren't Appalachians buying Appalachian literature, but by the numbers, their standards, then they're not going to sell it to us, both as booksellers, as vendors, or as consumers, as book buyers. And so I don't mean to be bleak about it, but the only way that I have a real access to stable, steady Appalachian books is through regional presses, university presses, and smaller presses. And it's just a hit or miss there on a major publisher. So I don't know, that's my input.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, I mean, it does seem like the big publishers tend to have sort of one or two, these are our Appalachian writers, or these are queer writers, or, and those are the ones they get behind. And there's not or there's the feeling that there's not as much room for, or big enough room for everybody. So I was thinking, like, this kind of connects leads into what I was thinking about with the media, with publishers, regarding Appalachian literature as regional literature, which is often seen as sort of like less than, right? Like literature with a lowercase l that doesn't matter to the rest of the world, that only speaks to people who live in Appalachia. And so, how can diverse Appalachian voices speak to a larger audience? Or do they need to speak to a larger audience? I'm interested in like what your perspectives are on the issues around Appalachian literature being labeled as regional literature, and about audience with your work.
Yeah, I mean, I think all literature is right. Amazing when you think about it. A writer, we keep using New York. I love New York. I'm sorry. I keep using New York as an example, but a writer who writes a short story or a novel set in New York, it's considered American literature almost immediately. It's not just a New York book, but, if we write a book that's set in Kentucky or North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, it's automatically considered regional. So I think one of the things that we're doing, like if we're talking about what sells, like Davis was talking about, and, as a former bookstore owner, that was an experience that I thought about on both sides. So what we're selling with this series is complexity. We're selling complexity of the region, that I'm hoping that we can sell complexity so that people can see that there's a variety in the region and it's not just one monolith. And then I hope that that trickles up or down or sideways, however it needs to trickle, and it begins to affect the larger publishing machine. And I think those big publishers have suddenly taken a second look at things. Like if you look at The Secret Lives of Church Women by Disha Filial, you know, West Virginia University Press can't be denied because it just won the Story Prize yesterday, and she's been nominated for everything. So I'm hoping with more.
She's also a board member. I just wanted to mention that.
Yes, she is. So I'm hoping. Well, I hope our board members help us to sell this complexity too. But I want to be hopeful because there's been such bad news for so long. So I'm hoping that that things will change. And I'll just stop jabbering there. But I do hope things change. And I'm really I keep using the word excited, but I'm really putting a lot into how much we can contribute to changing things.
Yeah, I think once some of these voices are amplified in different spaces, and I think in a weird way, I think COVID is playing a role in that. That's another discussion of theories, but I think then, you know, can we shift to looking at literature as something that doesn't get stuck in place, doesn't get boxed in place, and can the rest of the world value the narratives that are coming out of here, the stories that are coming out of here, and then the unique ways in which stories or literature is conveyed in this place, but can illuminate wherever the reader is. And you know, just like, you know, I read world literature, and it's not about where I'm from, but I value it because I have access to it. So, you know, I hope that this series can also help increase that access to just quality literature. You know, it's not just because it's from Appalachia, but it's just quality literature.
Yeah, absolutely. Davis, do you want to add anything?
I don't know. I just feel like it was all said. I was just listening. I think because I am younger and you know, working on this bookstore project and sort of just, you know, I have two brains. You know, I have this sort of the way that I learned from the East Coast book selling, like what New York was all about, what makes real literature, right? And a respect for that, a respect for well-published books, and just like you know, just an author getting their due. But then also just knowing, like, that's just not fair. there's so many places around the country, you know, if we are just talking about the US, where writing is happening, little pockets, little communities, creativity is happening. And I do think there's a particular marginalization and diverse representation that this you know, long stretch of land has. And to me, it's just more of a leveling out. It's just shocking that that this region has been chosen for its particular biases. And you know, you can, you know, you go anywhere in a country and you ask, you know, what do people make fun of you for, whatever, you know, how do people look down at you? So it's not like, you know, we're unique in that. It's just we got some damn good stories. And that's kind of like where I'm just the cheerleader, right? Like I'm a bookseller, I'm a forever cheerleader of great writing. And I just like haven't, you know, I haven't seen enough of the talent that I know exists here get onto that stage. And so I do kind of see our series as going outside of the region just because we can. So, but yeah.
I love the selling complexity. It's just such a great way to think about, you know, what the series is doing, but also what we want to do with our own work and our own writing. And I think that also sometimes for writers, there's a fear of being like pigeonholed, right? Or sort of like Annette said, sort of boxed in. And I mean, I think I've struggled with that at times where it's like, I'm a writer, I'm a queer writer, I'm a trans writer, but you know, I walk in a bookstore and like, I also want my book to be out front and not like hidden away in like this shelf that not that many people are looking at. But I love the example of Disha's book, Crystal, and how it's really just, you know, she wrote her story and the stories that she wanted to write, and now it's being recognized nationally. It's really great. So yeah, if people have questions, please, I guess write those and we will address some of the audience questions. I have one other one for you, and then I want to just, you know, if you have anything else that you want to say about the series or about publishing or about your own work. But I was thinking of, I guess, the role of literature and representation and how incredibly powerful it is when you see some aspect of yourself reflected in literature or in film, you know, whether it's the place where you're from or just the intersectionalities of your identities where you feel seen and heard. And from my personal experience, I think the first time I came across a queer story set in a rural place was Jim Grimsley, who's a North Carolina writer. And I read Dream Boy and I just was blown away, and I absolutely loved it, about two country boys who fall in love. And then, to be honest, like, I was deeply moved by Brokeback Mountain and Boys Don't Cry, because it was the first time I'd seen like rural queerness and rural trans experiences shown on a screen. And literature can be, you know, such a mirror, but also show you possibilities for like another way of life or a way you could live your life. So I was wondering if each of you could just talk about one of the first times or a significant time for you where you felt like you saw yourself or a part of your life represented in literature and the effect that had on you.
For me, there were three major writers: Ernest Gaines, Randall Keenan, and Gail Jones. And so I think that Ernest Gaines was one of the first writers for me that put Black people in small town life or rural life in Louisiana. Randall Keenan was writing about queer Black characters, but they were set in rural areas, which was exciting. And then Gail Jones brought me to Kentucky, like to actually see a fictional character walking around in Versailles or in Lexington, and it wasn't all rural, but I was like, okay, that is a place that I've been, or a similar place, and that was exciting for me. And what's horrible about it is that I didn't get that experience to have Black rural characters in Kentucky until I was in my 30s, probably. You know, when the Kentucky Women Writers Conference started, and people began to gift me books, and I think her first book was published in the 70s. So it took a long time for me to have that experience. So I'm hoping that young people can get these experiences in much earlier than I had to experience it. But it was just, I was already writing and had already published my books at the time, but it was just so affirming. It gave me permission. All three of those writers, each of them, when I read that, it gave me permission to keep going and not to feel like I had to fake some sort of experience or some identity that wasn't my own.
I had I guess, a similar experience that I feel like it comes a little bit later in life than early on. You know, in school, I was reading the Southern canonical writers, who I love. You know, I love Faulkner, but it wasn't until my mother gave me a book, and this author is problematic for his personal decisions, but as a writer, I will always credit Sherman Alexie with being the first Native writer that I read that gave me permission to write about authentic Native communities. Up until that point, and I was young, I mean, you know, going into high school, I think, but up until that point, I didn't think I could tell stories of where I was from. You know, I'm the first published novelist from the Eastern Band, so sorry, that's the bell. There weren't other options to read any novels from my tribe, and so, you know, Sherman Alexie is not Eastern Band Cherokee, but he talked about the humor of these communities and just real dialogue, and it wasn't romanticized versions of Native peoples, and so that flipped the switch. And then later reading people like Gerald Visner, who is almost like, in my mind, like a Native version of kind of Faulkner's originality. So I'm not going to say he is the Native Faulkner. That's not what I mean. But that he takes it out of typical syntax and prose, and just that you could break that form. So there was Visner, and then, you know, my current hero is Louise Airdrich, who I just keep going back to as someone whose writing is so wise and so just beautiful on the page. And so I think that those are the voices that I go back to, you know, regardless of what may go on outside of their books, the names I'd credit.
Oh, I feel like I have such a bad answer to this. I'm overwhelmed with all the books that have affected me, and I, you know, not speaking as a writer, but I guess I'd have to go back to, because I was such an English major kid. You know, I was really affected by some of the early, like, well, James Joyce wrote Portrait of the Artist as a young man, and it's the first time I saw sort of a critique of religious upbringing and being able to speak to the sense of the self as an artist. And then from there, it was, you know, all your standard stream of consciousness, out there literature. But I think if I had to speak to maybe recently that I've come back around to, and I'm not doing this just because you're here, Carter, but honestly, to Pretty Star, and seeing the way that, you know, those conversations with family that are so hard, and yet are so real and are so close to home, that definitely was something where I was seen, and I felt seen in this region. And then I guess I'll mention Jen Shaplin's my autobiography, Carson McCullers, just because I think it was such comfortably tied, you know, your own identity with the development of books and authors' lives. And, you know, I think that, you know, I could pick hundreds of books. This active relationship that we have, that bookstores and publishing is all living, and that's when it changed for me from, oh, I'm just a person that likes books, to I'm a bookseller. And now being able to, like, confidently attach Appalachian to that identity has been, I think, a part of the reason I'm a part of the series. So.
Great, thank you. So if there are any questions from the audience in the Q&A, I think Anne is going to ask those or relay those to us. Maybe we'll.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apologies, everyone. We have slight technical difficulty with the Q&A feature. So if you want to email questions, I will read them out, and Carter can pass those along. You can email them to me at asa@marshall.edu, which is asa@marshall, marshall.edu.
All right. Do y'all have anything else you want to say that you didn't get a chance to say in our conversation?
Well, I did want to mention that, you know, as much as we have talked about that we are not defining Appalachia, that and we represent, you know, certain pieces of that community. It is even broad. We're looking for literature from even broader representation of communities. So I know that our social media that's been out recently has talked about looking for also, you know, Asian voices and Latinx voices. And so I just wanted to be, you know, clear that we are looking for a variety of what is the future of Appalachia, and, you know, open to questions and ideas about what that might look like.
Thanks, Annette. I'm wondering, I'm thinking maybe we can wrap up, and then if people have questions, they could email them into Anne, and then we can answer them individually or something, because it might take a while to wait for people to email questions in right now as we're waiting.
Just I could add something real quick. If you're...
I also wanted to ask about your bookstore, Davis, if you want to say anything about that. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, that's what I was actually just going to jump in and say. I know it's been such a long process in the works, and so I'm just now getting around to the promotion. So this is like the first public event I feel like I'm talking about it. But we've just made a website live. The bookstore is called Atlas Books. If you go to the website, it's atlasbooksjc.com. It's very minimal, but what's more important is that we have a bookshop.org page, and that's searchable. And I don't know if you all know about bookshop.org. I'll say something about that. That started last year, actually right before the pandemic. But they are sort of a primary competitor to Amazon, and what they do is they support independent bookstores who are members of the American Booksellers Association. So we not only do we get a commission and being signed up and being a retailer through them, but they also do a pool share every 6 months for independent bookstores. So just throwing that out there, that's the best way to support us now. But the biggest idea is this whole community, and I have 2 other worker members, Kate and Emily, that we've sort of volunteered the starting of this whole process. And we are going to be having a book award at some point. We're working on that to try to uplift Appalachian literature. But again, really leaning into this community approach. I mean, I've been in bookselling long enough to know that it's not easy, and it's not, it's not something that just happens. It happens because there is this huge community around it. And one of my favorite things is author events. I have gotten to host literally over 500 author events. I say that just because when I was in DC, we were doing hundreds a year. And there's something magical about that experience. And so I can't wait for us to get back in person, because there's something about sort of the exchange of what's taking place. It's not even necessarily the book or the author or what it's about. It's that, people are there. It's like a homecoming. And that's what I'm really excited about the series. And again, all of these books, we're going to do featured books of the month, and we're going to make sure that diverse Appalachian voices are lifted up in that. And that's what I'm just inviting people into in the creation of the store. I got to figure out all the money stuff, and we're going to make sure it's sustainable. But I'm really just saying, come make a home. I have this vision of there being so many more, and there are some great bookstores already in the region, but so many more of them, so that if, any one of you has a book, you can literally go on a 10 city tour within the region, and know that you're going to be welcomed, and know that the audience is going to be there for you and understand you, and is going to pre-order your books, you know. And it isn't as much, you know, people joke about poetry being, you know, poets buy each other's books. You know, it may be the same thing in the Appalachian, you know, literature. We got to buy each other's books, you know. It's not so much about making the big bucks as much as it is about, you know, creating this sense of a longevity in this region through book selling. And so that's what I'm trying to do. That's what we're trying to do. And we're committed to those cooperative ideals, and, you know, not having a boss or owner structure. And we'll have advisory board, you know. I'll take all of the encouragement and help that we can get to make it the right type of community home in Johnson City. So.
Okay, we've got a couple questions here. First question from Michelle Maroney. She wants to know if you can talk about the timeline for the project.
I'm assuming that means a series.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, just make sure. Well, I guess I'll say I don't think we'll have any books out until at least fall of 22. That would be the soonest. We're obviously signing contracts all through this year, which I guess I'll say that if you have a proposal, it should be listed on the site, on the Kentucky Press site, but it should go to Abby Freeland. It's freelandae@gmail.com. I think we don't have a strict timeline yet, is what I would say. But I think by 2023, you should be seeing things out in the world pretty regularly. And I know that we're hoping for several titles within a year. Again, don't want to say too many specifics. So.
Okay, great. Next question from Susan Weaver. What is the reception of young people in your community, college student age, to your works? Do they want to know more about the heritage, or do they want to escape?
Well, what's been exciting for me has been that young people from this area who may be college students kind of staying in Western North Carolina, for example, or Appalachia, now can see themselves in literature more than they have ever been or been able to. So I've had former students of mine in my high school classroom who are now in college who have reached back out and talked about, just as we were talking about earlier, just being able to identify. So I don't know that it's, you know, that's kind of a different part of that question. They're not trying to escape. They're not trying to necessarily learn more about heritage, but they're just finding themselves in the literature. I know that there are some universities in the area that are reading, and I think for a lot of them, it's if they are not familiar with my community, it is more learning about that piece of the culture, maybe more so than escaping, but I don't have a great sense of it yet. New to the game. I don't know, Crystal, what about you?
Well, I think that that part of our job is to, of course, be able to, a reader to immerse in the worlds that we create. And then if those worlds are based on a place that they're familiar with, there's another level of sinking down into it when you like Annette said, when you can see yourself. But I think the thing about Appalachian writing is the same as it is everywhere. You know, when you read Faulkner, you are seeing the sort of historical look at people during that time. You're also, you know, escaping, as far as escaping in the way that you sink down into a good book. And I think that we all are providing that. It's just the extra layer of, oh, this particular book is placed. There's a place and a sense of place that I'm familiar with. There are characters living in a place and doing particular things that I'm familiar with. And I think that has a wide, you know, if we do our jobs, we hope, right, that it has a wide range. You know, I think that's why, you know, Disha's book has been so successful, because you can identify sort of small town aspects in her book, but a good story is a good story. And I think that's the thing about, if you're able to create complexity, a good story is a good story, whether it's set in wherever, Indian Creek, Kentucky, or Brooklyn, New York, or Nepal, or wherever it's set. I don't know if that answers the question any deeper. Thank you for that question. I appreciate that question.
Okay, we've got another one. It's about Disha's book, and that you all mentioned the success of it. Do you think the university presses are entering into a new period?
I think so. I think that university presses, you know, there are things that they do differently than, say, a New York house, but I think that when a university press book can get on some of these lists, I think it makes everybody's eyebrows go up a little bit. And if there's a vehicle for the book from a small or university press to get out into the world, and once people can see it's good writing and it's not sort of pigeonholed as being university press or small press or Appalachian press, then I think that these books can fly in wonderful ways. I think you know, Carter's book has flown in wonderful ways too, and Annette's book, and I think that a lot of writers with university presses have that. You know, Robert's book is flying, Robert Geip. So I think that there are lots of ways for university presses to sort of escape the pigeonhole and get the work out there. A lot of the work is done in-house. There's all those layers, right? There's the sales layer and the bookstore layer and the marketing layer from in-house and in the university press. But I think they're getting there, don't you all? You feel that?
Yeah, I would say, oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I was just saying, yeah, I think so. And thanks, just a shout out to my publishers, which is Hub City Press, which is out of South Carolina. And I think, yeah, we've seen some changes with university presses and the smaller presses in the region. That's really exciting.
I mean, I was going to say it's a testament to the University Press Kentucky that they're willing to take on this series. You know, it requires a certain flexibility. So, you know, often the discussion is trade versus academic. And, you know, this is a trade series. This is, you know, the prices of the books will be reasonable. And, you know, we're really working on disseminating them again in the indie bookstore market. You know, partially because I'm here. That's a really big important feature to me, because there are some presses that it's harder to get a hold of their books, even though they're great books. It's just a logistics thing. It's silly, but there's a lot of logistics things. And so I think that I just applaud them on being willing to give us this space to do it. And so I hope that other university presses are willing to be so bold and know that in the long run, it will probably make money for the press, you know, like, you know, we're shooting for some good goals, I think, on how many copies we think these can sell, because we really believe in the stories that we're sharing. So.
Okay, great. That is all the questions that we had sent in.
All right. Well, I'm super excited about this series and I think the possibilities for literature right now that, you know, that Black and Native and queer and writers and who've always been writing maybe are going to find more support now from publishers, from academia, from the literary community. So it's been such a pleasure to listen to you all and to learn from you. Thank you for your time. That's all I have today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You all. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thanks, everybody.